Hello, EduMagicians. Welcome to the EduMagic podcast with your host, Dr. Sam Fessich. Dr. Sam is a professor of education, author of EduMagic, and a pumpkin spice latte fan. This podcast is designed for pre-service teachers. Remember, friends, teaching doesn't begin at graduation, but during that first class at 8 a.m. Let's get this party started.
I'm Jake Miller from the Educational Duct Tape Podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect those of others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hello, EduMagicians, and welcome back to another episode of the EduMagic Podcast. My name is Dr. Sam Fessich. Today I have with me Jennifer Lemaitre, and she's going to be sharing all about how to get you started with a tutoring business. So if you're thinking about setting up a tutoring side hustle during your college career, or if that's something you want to explore during your summers or during your breaks in the semester, Jennifer's going to break it all down for you about, how can we get started with tutoring? What are some tips when we start our tutoring business or tips for tutoring in general? And, also where you can connect with Jennifer at the end of the show. So Jennifer, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you on.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here with you.
Awesome. So Jennifer, would you mind starting us off sharing your teaching story? And I start off with this question because I think it's so interesting to hear and see how people started their careers in education and where their journey has led them to what they're doing today.
Absolutely. Yes. So I started teaching 10 years ago, which is wild to say out loud sometimes. The time definitely flew by, but I went to Georgia State University, and I know some people kind of stumble into education, right? Like sometimes they go to school for, let's say, journalism, and they end up a classroom teacher, or they go to school for business and end up a classroom teacher. But I was the girl who kind of knew from the beginning that I wanted to be a classroom teacher. Stationery excites me. Back to school season, I love being at the stores and just seeing all the displays. The Target circle always gets me, right? Every time. And so, yeah, I knew pretty early on that I wanted to be a teacher. And if I'm completely honest, when I got to school, I was not declared. I wasn't quite sure what to declare my major, even though at the back of my mind, I knew I wanted to teach. But of course, we realized that when you have conversations, especially in college, sometimes people can project their fears onto you. And so when I was in school, when I said I wanted to be a teacher, it was kind of like this, oh, wow, I could never do that. Like stuff like that.
Yes. And I'm sure our middle school majors who are listening in on this can totally identify with that, because I'm sure they get, what's your major? And they say middle school or middle level, like, ooh, I could never deal with middle schoolers.
Exactly, right? So people, they mean well, but they end up
Mhm.
saying things that if you're not careful, you can internalize. And then you start questioning whether or not you're making the right decision.
Yes.
And so I struggled if I'm honest, like the first 2 years, I was kind of like, oh, well, maybe I'll be a psychology major, or maybe I'll do this. And then it just got to the point where one of my mentors at the time, he asked me, he's like, well, Jennifer, if you get a degree in psychology, you do realize you'll need to continue obtaining your master's, because psychology is very broad. Right. And he asked me, like, do you want to be a lawyer? I was like, no. He's like, do you want to be a doctor? I'm like, no. He's like, what about, being a teacher? So he kind of resurrected a desire I already had,
Huh.
and I was like, I do want to be a teacher. And I was fortunate because the College of Ed at GSU, they allowed me to do a bit of field experience before declaring my major. So it wasn't like I was it wasn't like student teaching, but I was able to go into an actual school and see how I even feel being in that environment. And I loved it.
Oh, that's awesome. And GSU, can you tell us
Yes,
what that
Georgia
stands
State
for?
University.
There we go. Thank you. There's lots of acronyms for schools. I want to make sure we get it right.
Yes, no problem. Go Panthers. So Georgia State, I
I
am
love
a
it.
proud Panther. So yeah, Georgia State University. And having that experience before committing to changing my major or declaring my major was actually great for me because I knew, yeah, this is where I want to be. So I went through teaching. I was fortunate where upon graduation, I was able to secure a teaching job. I actually ended up teaching. My first school position was actually at a school I went to when I was in elementary.
Oh, full circle moment, right?
Full circle, full circle. And my
Oh.
principal was still there, so she ended up being my boss.
Oh.
And my first grade teacher became my coworker because she was still there.
Oh my goodness.
I know. But yeah, teaching was an amazing experience for me. I taught in public schools for a few years. I taught in a public charter school for a few years. So I got to see a little bit of everything. And I just love to teach. It's interesting. My middle name, Lemaitre, actually means master teacher in French. So
Oh my okay, well, that's just fate right there,
my
it's in the name.
and it was destiny. They were like, "You're going to be a teacher." So, yeah, I enjoyed my teaching journey for sure.
That is awesome, and I love how you took us through college years and how you had a degree in psychology. You're like, "I don't wanna be a lawyer, I don't wanna be a doctor," and then trying out teaching again, and I think that's such a great story to share because we might have students listening in that are thinking about switching majors or going into education or having in the back of their mind, "I might wanna be a teacher, maybe that's something I'd wanna be,"
Mm.
and then you working at the school in which you were a student for elementary school and having your former principal as your boss. That's so exciting. That's so neat. But what are you doing now? What are you doing now, Jennifer?
So now, actually, as of just a few months ago, I am full time in my tutoring business.
Okay.
Yeah, so that journey was interesting because now 3 years ago, in 2018, I found myself suddenly unemployed. So I had been teaching at that point for 7 years,
Mhm.
and I was up for a promotion in my school district's central office. And I was excited. Of course, I wouldn't be in the classroom anymore, but I felt like I would still be making an impact in education, even if it wasn't
Okay.
as a classroom teacher.
Yeah.
So I was excited for the role. It looked great. The interview went amazing. And I was pretty confident I was going to get it. And so was my school. They were so confident that they actually filled my teaching position as I was waiting to hear back.
No.
Yes. And so when that happened, I'm like, okay, I was waiting and waiting to hear back from the central office, and funding evidently fell through. So the
Oh,
job I had
Jennifer.
interviewed
Oh my
for,
gosh.
right, it was traumatic, honestly, 'cause at that point, I'm thinking, wait, I went from having a possible promotion to now being unemployed. And of course, my school was willing to work with me. They're like, sure, we can give you your job back. But I'm thinking, yeah, but then you have to tell the person you already told yes that you don't have a job for them. And
Right.
so it just didn't sit well with me. And so I mourned for about 48 hours. And then
Yeah.
after that, it was like, okay, well, Jennifer, what can you do? And again, at my core, I know I'm meant to teach. And so tutoring kind of just started because it was a need, right? I needed to be able to have some type of income. And so I started tutoring. It was very casual at first. And eventually, happy ending, guys, I do get a teaching job again at a different school.
Mhm.
But at that point, I'd already got a few clients, and I was committed to helping them see their journey through. So I was
Right.
teaching and tutoring simultaneously for 3 years. And I loved it. I loved tutoring and I loved, of course, teaching. But then this year, obviously with the pandemic, and all of that, I thought my
Mhm.
tutoring business would suffer, and the opposite took place.
Oh, wow.
Instead, we had a wait list during a pandemic, right? So parents were
Mm.
reaching out and please can you tutor my child? They need support, all of this. And so I went from being a solopreneur to having a team of tutors that work for me.
Oh, wow.
Mhm. And so we've been able to impact students nationwide at this point. And then this past year, well, I say a few months ago, maybe like at the start of 2021, I realized, I think I want to give my tutoring business my undivided attention. And this is my 10th year,
Mm.
right? So
Mhm,
I
mhm.
prayed about it. I was, I was nervous naturally to leave the classroom, but
Sure.
I was pretty clear that it was time and that I had accomplished what I set out to do 10 years ago, right? Like I wanted to impact scholars. I did that. I wanted to be the best teacher I could possibly be. I feel like I did that, right? Everything I wanted to serve in a low income community. I did that. So all the things
Mhm.
that were important to me, I had accomplished. I felt like it was time to kind of pass the baton almost. And so, yeah, as of May, this year, I am full time in my tutoring business, and it has been exciting so far.
That is such a beautiful story from where we began that story of, we were so confident I would have this position. It was great, and then funding fell through.
Mhm.
Isn't it interesting? And to look back and see that, we mourned for 48 hours, I think you said,
Yeah.
and then something beautiful happened out of this. A blessing happened out of this
Mhm.
story, and you never know. You never know where your story is going to take you. And you said, I've already impacted scholars. I've worked in low income, but I would argue, Jennifer, that you're still impacting scholars. You haven't passed that baton on
Yeah.
100% because you're still impacting students, and now even at a larger scale.
Mhm.
And that, I don't know about you, but I got goosebumps during your story. That is a great story. I love this.
Thank you. And I agree with you. I'm so happy that you brought my focus back to that. 'Cause that's something I do say. That's one of the advantages of tutoring is that it's not, I know a lot of teachers struggle with teacher guilt if and when they decide to leave the classroom.
Mhm.
But tutoring, I feel like alleviates some of that because you realize you have not abandoned your passion, right? You can still
No.
serve students even if it's not in the traditional classroom setting. And
Right.
so you're right. I definitely feel like I'm still in my element because I absolutely adore teaching. Um, it just looks different now, right?
It does. Oh, that's awesome, Jennifer. All right, let's jump into this. I know we have some future teachers really excited about, getting into being a tutor, or maybe they've asked to like tutor a family member or a neighbor, or if they're, doing some coursework with students where they get to do some field and some tutoring. What are some tips that you have for future teachers to kind of dip their toe in the water with tutoring, whether it's a traditional tutoring like a face to face, or I think more often than not, it's going to be a virtual tutoring experience.
Hmm. Yeah, well, one, I would encourage my future teachers just to think about what they love to teach. And the reason I emphasize that is because sometimes I know with a lot of tutors is that they try to pitch themselves as a general ed tutor. So it's like, oh, I tutor everything. I do reading, math, social studies, science. I mean, all the subjects. And if you actually like sit them down and have a conversation, you'll realize there's probably one subject area that they love more than the others. Um,
Mhm.
and I feel like part of something I teach my clients is that you want to make sure you're operating your business from a place of integrity. And so when you are, selling your services, when you're telling families, hey, I tutor, not only is it important that it's a subject area that you actually enjoy, but also something that you know you're really good at.
Yes,
You
yes.
know, because like for me, for example, I was an elementary school teacher for 10 years. So I did teach everything essentially. However, even though I can teach, math, am I the best at it? Uh, I'm good. I can make sure that my kids aren't, like traumatized after being in my classroom. But I know that there are some other educators who are masterful when it comes to mathematics. Now, my sweet spot is without a doubt structured literacy, reading instruction.
Mm,
I can help any of my babies learn how to read. And
mhm,
so that is what I had to learn to lean into. So for a future teacher, I would tell them really consider what you enjoy teaching and then what you know you're really exceptional at. And a subject area that you're committed to continue becoming more exceptional at, right? So we're always learning. As educators, we should be perpetual learners.
mhm.
And so you
Right.
want to think about how, okay, you might be really great at math or really good at math. Let's become great. And then once you're great, become the best, right? Like just
Yes.
keep becoming better so that you can really serve your two T's. So that'd be the first thing I would say. Just identify what you even want to tutor in and what you're really good at. That way you're operating from a place of integrity.
I love that.
And then also I would just say to consider, obviously how much you want to charge. So this tends to be an interesting conversation for educators, period. And The reason I think so is because we already know that teachers are unfortunately notoriously underpaid.
Right.
And so a lot of times whenever I talk to teachers who are looking to start a tutoring business, they really struggle with pricing themselves because they've never really added a monetary value to their expertise.
Yes. Thank you. Yes.
And so they really struggle. They're like, "Oh, Jennifer, how's $15 an hour?" And I'm like, "Girl, are you crazy?" What? What are we talking? I'm like, "You have a whole degree. Why are you
Mhm.
charging 15 an hour?" Um, and a lot of times it comes from this false belief that somehow if they actually profit from their passion, that means that they don't actually care about kids.
Mm.
And I'm like,
Huh.
no. I think the opposite is true. I think that when you are charging for your actual value, the results that you know you can get for your students and all of that, one, it helps you to serve them better because that gives you access to resources you may employ in your tutoring business, right? If
Yes.
you're undercharging, how can you get your students the best resources that you need to serve them well? And so yeah, I definitely think just like sitting down with yourself and deciding, okay, how much am I going to charge based on my experience, my expertise, and obviously what is realistic for you to be able to hit your revenue goals.
Mhm.
So I think those would be the top two, I would say, for just a future teacher who's considering it. There's definitely a lot more things to consider.
Right.
Yeah, I would start there.
I like that. So starting off with what's your passion? What do you love to teach? What are you really good at teaching? And finding your value as an educator. Because you're right. Maybe our future teachers don't maybe they don't have a full degree yet, but they're working on it. But for our new teachers who might be listening, you have an undergraduate degree, or maybe you have additional certifications, or heck, even a master's degree.
Hmm.
Price what you're worth. Price what you're worth. And
Absolutely.
and that's a message, that needs to be heard for all the educators listening in today.
Yes.
So, why is tutoring? Why is this a nice option for our future teachers who are studying to become educators of excellence? So they may not have a full teaching degree yet, but they're
Mhm.
working on it. So, why is tutoring a good option for them to start to explore?
One of the reasons, man, I wish I would have tutored, honestly, when I was still in school because it gives you additional field experience, right? So when you
Hmm.
think about it, when you're going through your undergraduate program, you're probably in the first half, you're probably doing a lot more of like the textbook type of assignments.
Sure.
You're learning about pedagogy, right? You're establishing what yours is, but you typically don't do student teaching until the end, the latter part
Right.
of you pursuing your degree. I would say that it gives you additional experience so that you can identify what is your teaching style. You could even be testing out some of the things you're learning in class, right? On your TT,
Absolutely.
right? You can see it in real life because we all know it's a very different experience to learn about something from a book as opposed to going and implementing it, and seeing how effective it is or isn't, or maybe it's effective, but you might identify a way you can tweak it to make it even more effective. And
Hmm.
so I think tutoring would give any future teachers that one, it would give you that field experience. Two, I think it can boost your confidence because you'll realize, wow, I'm really helping these kids. I'm really helping these students,
Yes. Yes.
and I think it can just help you feel like you are in the right field and that you are about to seriously impact your classroom once you have your own. And so
Mm-hmm.
it just gives that additional the experience. And I also say I think it can help you identify your secret sauce. And so every teacher, right? Like we're all going through the same programs, right? If your cohort, they're all in the same classroom with you. But you want to consider, okay, even though we're all learning from the same professor, within this cohort, we're not all going to teach the same.
Mm-hmm.
And
You're right.
so when you're tutoring, you get to identify what is your secret sauce style, right? What is the way that you're able to communicate big concepts and make it bite sized for your two T's, right? How can
Mm-hmm.
you make sure that you are helping them learn, right? Because they're coming to you because there's an opportunity for growth typically, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're
Right.
considering and you're putting on your teacher hat to identify what can I do to close this academic gap, right? And so
Mm.
I just think it's a great experience. It helps you to test out some of the things you're learning in school. It helps you to build your confidence as you see the impact you're making in the lives of your two T's. I just think it's an amazing option. And if you're in school, it's a way to make additional money, right? So,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. I love those reasons, but you started off with making an impact with students and helping, grow your confidence as a teacher. Teaching is it's a practice and it's an art. We get better at it with, as we practice different methods and strategies. We see what works, and being able to apply what we're learning in our college classrooms in a tutoring type space could be really helpful for us as future teachers as we begin to grow and learn and see how these things play out in a classroom setting.
For sure. Completely agree.
And of course, it's some nice extra pizza money, right? Because we all like yeah, it's nice to have a little some more money to, spend during your college experience. That's excellent.
Yes.
S- So, Jennifer, I'm thinking that some of our listeners today are like, all right, I think I'm going to jump in and I'm going to try to start tutoring. What are some tips that you have for them as they get started? Maybe they have a few tutees, or maybe they're working, through the school or something like that at their college or university. What are some ways that they can um, maybe not content specific, but start to build that relationship with their 2D, whether it's something that's across the screen or just across the table? How can they start to get to know the student or students in front of them, and then work in those relationship building skills while they're developing that content and while they're working with that student? Because we know that relationships first, procedure second, content third, right? We got to work on those relationships first. So, would you mind sharing some strategies to get to know the individual that you're going to be working with?
Yes. Okay. So some things, here are 3 tips I would suggest for any tutor who is preparing maybe for their first tutoring session, a new client, whatever the case may be, just to kind of build that rapport. I would highly recommend that you make time for like an all about me, right?
Mm,
So maybe you can call or send your 2T an email where you introduce yourself. And or maybe even during your first session, you might have, if you're virtual, you could share an actual slide where you just
ooh,
kind of tell them a few things about yourself, right? And maybe if
yeah.
you're dealing with younger students, let them have a show and tell opportunity. Maybe they can share something with you about themselves, just so you can kind of break the ice. And even with middle schoolers, I think sometimes we overestimate, like middle schoolers, yes, they're cool kids, but
They are cool kids.
they're such cool kids, but they still want to talk about themselves, right?
Mhm,
So you can
mhm,
provide them with an opportunity to just share something as well to kind of break the ice. Something else I would recommend to any tutor who's trying to just build that rapport and, establish themselves as a tutor that parents really respect is definitely make sure that you are front loading and communicating important information ahead of time, right? So like make sure your families are aware of when you guys are meeting, where are you meeting? If it's not
mhm,
virtual, right? If it's virtual, make
mhm,
sure they have the Zoom link or Google Meets or whatever you're using. Make sure they have whatever they need, materials that they might need to have on hand. Make sure they know what your policies and procedures are. So even if you are tutoring as a side hustle, one thing I strongly believe is that if you take your business seriously, other people will take it seriously. Right?
yes.
So if you treat it really
Yes.
casually and you're just kind of like freestyling your way through your tutoring business, you'll notice that clients are very inconsistent and they just kind of do what they want because the expectations have not been clearly communicated. So definitely make sure that you're communicating and front loading important information such as when and where, what materials they may need, and of course, any policies and procedures that are honest or that are accurate for your business, right? Um,
Okay.
and then the last tip I'd probably give a tutor is, and for any educator, they should be doing, we should all be doing this, is make sure you prep and review your lesson, right? So
Yeah.
prepare. So, yes, you're tutoring, but you're still teaching, right? And so
Mhm.
I would recommend, of course, if it's your 2T's first session, they may be a bit nervous. And to be honest, sometimes some 2T's have a bit of shame that they need a tutor, which is a whole thing I'm trying to debunk, right? Because we're not ashamed when
Yeah.
you need a personal trainer. You're not ashamed
Right, you're
when you
right.
need a piano teacher, but some students are kind of, they're embarrassed. Like, oh, I have a tutor. That means whatever they think it means, right?
Mhm,
And
mhm,
so make sure you're prepared for the session because they might be nervous, but also the tutor, you might be nervous. And so if you
mhm.
prepare, it can just help to ease anxiety you may have, and it helps you to make a good a good first impression because it shows like, wow, this tutor is really on it, you know? So those are
Yes.
some tips I would give to anyone tutoring for sure.
I love those tips. And let's just recap those really quick.
Yeah.
So we start with, letting the parents know when, where, what to bring for
Mhm.
the tutoring session. Getting to know your students as individuals, having it all about me and having them share about themselves as well.
Mhm.
Um, in addition to having your policies set up, I like how I said you don't want to be free willing at your business. You have to take it seriously. And yeah, 100% agree on that one. Those are excellent tips. Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Yes, you're welcome.
It kind of reminded me of the Instagram live you did about what kind of tutor are you?
Yeah.
And I'm going to see if I can link that in the show notes. I don't know if you can like link a specific live,
You
but
the IGTV, yeah, you can.
oh, perfect. All right. I'm going to link that in our show notes for our listeners to watch. Speaking of Instagram, you like that segue there? Jennifer, can you please share how my listeners can learn more about you and connect with you?
Yes. And so I am definitely the most active on Instagram. And you can find me at the Jennifer Lemaitre. That's TheJennifer. Lemaitre is Lemaitre. And that's where I share tips about tutoring businesses, how to encourage my tutors to start their own, tips so that theirs are thriving. I also offer coaching support for any educators who are looking to really start a tutoring business and lean into it, right? To see how it can
Mhm.
become more than just something they casually do, right? And even if you are doing it casually, how can you make it an excellent experience for your clients? And so, yeah,
Ooh,
at the Jennifer Lemaitre is definitely where I'm the most active. And my website is jenniferlemaitre.com.
excellent. I'll put all those links in the show notes. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining me today on this episode.
Thank you for having me. This was a great conversation.
And there you have it, EduMagicians. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with your friends. For more EduMagic, check out sfessage.com and follow Dr. Sam on Twitter and Instagram at sfessage. Until next time, you have the EduMagic within you.